I used to have several sites. Now I kind of like the grower's edge. It gives me that cash max. You can tell it which markets you're looking for, and it will tell you what your highest net back is based on the price they're paying at that time and the basis that they're paying. And that's pretty handy because I don't have to go to so many different sites.
Good afternoon, welcome to GrainTV. My name is Cody. Today is Monday the 24th, and we have the market sharply lower here on the open, heavily influenced by the outside markets. Basically what we saw is a huge sell-off there in China. We saw European shares also down over 4%. Shanghai shares were down 8.5%. We saw the U.S. Dow Jones Industrial Average down as much as 1,000 points there in the earlier part of the trade session before it was able to rally back close to unchanged and then sell off and close down to 3.57% lower here on the day. So just a very volatile trade session characterized by a significant amount of selling across across the entire market. I mean, we saw crude oil down over 5% today as well at certain points during the trade session. So basically just a lot of selling. That put pressure on corn, soybeans, and wheat early on in the trade session. Corn and wheat were able to come back here, and I think part of the reason for that is simply because of the fundamentals, simply because you have this story of ProFarmer having toured the U.S., taking samples throughout the field, kind of an unbiased view of the corn crop. That was kind of either confirming or refuting the USDA estimates there in August, and what we saw was a ProFarmer coming out with estimates for corn yield lower than where the current USDA projections are. And I think that kind of helped things out. That news came out after the market closed on Friday. So this morning I think we were beaten heavily down by the macro selling, kind of pressuring the grains. But I think that story of ProFarmer coming out there with yields lower than expected for corn in particular helped corn futures come back and close in the positive. Let's take a look at where we close off the day. Corn futures trading up 4.25 cents, soybeans trading down 14 cents, and wheat in Chicago here trading up 5 cents on the day. Now soybeans, on the other hand, we don't have the same sort of story. We have a situation where it started low. It was able to erase half those losses, but still closing down 14 cents on the day. When you look at the ProFarmer yield, they were for the most part in line with USDA estimates. They were off by about 0.4 bushels per acre, so not a huge deviation from where the USDA announced their yield estimates for soybeans in the August report. So no major changes there. I think the other thing is China, a real wild card. The fact that China shares were down so much going into today's session, that really puts a big question mark in the Chinese economy. And with China making up a huge amount of the demand for soybeans, that certainly made traders a little bit nervous and added to some of that selling pressure here this morning. So soybeans most heavily affected by the selling here today, and ends up closing down 14 cents to 875.5 on the November contract. Now we did get a nice piece of news this morning. Exporters did sell 120,000 metric tons of new crop soybeans to unknown destinations, but that really not enough to make any sort of difference in the kind of frenzy that we saw today on the floor. Now when you look at the chart here, let's take a quick look at the November daily chart. Each one of these bars represents 1 day worth of price activity. You'll see that we were able to close right at 875. Now we had a low of 855 during the day. So we had a big rally back from the lows, but really not enough. I'm going to be I remain relatively bearish here of these soybeans. I am concerned about them. I think in general there's a significant amount of ending stocks. The fact that ProFarmer didn't see any major deviation, any major difference from the USDA's report, that to me really adds a little bit more oomph to that USDA report that we saw on August 12th, when so many people were scratching their heads saying, really, is this really the kind of yield that we're going to get out of soybeans, especially after the excessively wet planting season early on? Well, it seems as though pod setting is occurring during the very, very good month. August, getting plenty of moisture, staying cool, no major stress on the crop. So it looks as though things have a bright outlook in terms of production, and I think that that is going to weigh heavily on prices going forward. I think it is quite possible that we bounce back up, possibly to the $9 area, but I do think that that will offer up some resistance, and in general right now the weather is not supporting any sort of premium to be put into soybeans. Not only that, but you look at the basis last week, and despite the fact that prices haven't been doing very well, basis also declined. So that's something you want to keep in mind as well. Now let's take a quick look at the corn daily chart. You'll notice corn was able to bounce off of that 365.5 low, that support area where I put the red line. I think that's a support, that's critical support. You'll notice we went down through there on the Wednesday of August 12th. We went down through there, but we closed above it. Today we went down to that area, but we found support there. We rallied back and we closed right near that 20-day moving average. I really think that 363 is a strong support area. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit of buying pressure here tomorrow, kind of follow through after this nice rally that we've seen today off of the lows. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Pro Farmers yield estimates were slightly below where the USDA, significant enough to cause a little bit of a rally here, I would suspect. Now let's take a quick look at the weather outlook this week. You'll notice that it's going to be cooler than normal across the U.S. from Monday through Sunday. Particularly, it's going to be cooler throughout the Midwest, the main growing areas. It'll be hotter than normal there on the western part of the U.S., but the key growing areas for corn and soybeans should remain cooler, with some precipitation noted in the middle of the week for that northwestern part of the grain belt. But in general, the majority of the grain belt will not be receiving much for precipitation, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem here this week. Let's take a look at export inspections. We won't spend too much time on this. You'll notice corn, soybeans, wheat, all coming within analyst expectations. Corn was on the lower side of analyst expectations. Wheat was also on the lower side of analyst expectations, but certainly nothing too surprising here. We got corn with 883,000 metric tons inspected for export, wheat with 277,000 metric tons inspected for export, and soybeans with 210,000 metric tons inspected for export. Now let's switch our attention over here to corn crop conditions. We'll notice that this week we were unchanged for both corn and soybeans. Corn was unchanged here at 69% of the crop rated good to excellent. We see about 39% of the crop dented. That compares to 43% dented in the 4-year average, so we're on pace there. Nothing too surprising. Analysts were expecting to see mostly unchanged crop conditions this week. That's exactly what we got. Now, when you look at soybeans, we're 87% of the crop is in that pod setting stage. So it is important that we don't get any major weather events, but it looks as though there's not going to be any sort of major stress here going forward for the rest of this week. So that's going to be good for the soybean crop. One thing to note is that spring wheat is well ahead of the four-year moving average when it comes to harvest. It is 75% complete in terms of harvested acreage compared to only 47%, which is typically what we see in the 4-year moving average. Guys, that wraps up today's show. If you have any questions about what we talked about today, please give the office a call. The number is 877-472-4607. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you here on Tuesday.